Hello?
There it is. Okay. Can you all hear me this way too?
Yes.
I might stay up here since we only have 2 mics. Okay.
Okay.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. Jason, thank you so much for that amazing presentation. Can we give Jason another round of applause? Okay, so we're going to have a bit more of a robust conversation around Rail in Ohio, and as you can see, we have some amazing perspectives that we're going to talk about. But I just want to come full circle on the conversation comparing North Carolina to Ohio. One of the things that Mitch had started with this morning was the common pushback that we hear, which is that this can't happen in Ohio. And we very strategically wanted to have you all see the use case in North Carolina, because there are a lot of similarities between North Carolina and Ohio. So I just wanted to start with a few stats and then we'll get into our conversation. So North Carolina, in terms of its size physically and its political representation, is also very close to Ohio's. In their main route, the Piedmont route that Jason mentioned, that starts in Charlotte and goes to Raleigh, which is their capital at the end, which has Greensboro in the middle. So that route has a population of 5.6 million people, roughly. And Ohio's 3 C and D, so we use the Piedmont and compare this to what we could do here in Ohio. So 5.6 in North Carolina, 7.6 in Ohio. In North Carolina, along that route, we've also estimated that there's about 285,000 college students within 30 minutes of a stop on the 3 C and D. And on the Piedmont route, that is approximately 150,000. So just want to say that Ohio we can see that this can work in places that are very similar, and we just need to keep going with all the energy and momentum. So Jason, I wanted to thank you for that, and I also wanted to call out too that North Carolina is pretty far down the road compared to Ohio on this, but when North Carolina started, the service was arguably not super reliable, not super fast, not super exciting. It didn't have a lot of frequency, but you have to start somewhere. And once you start somewhere, you can continue to build on that over time. And you start with that urban core, and as you can see, 25, 30 years later, they're expanding to every corner of the state, including their large metro areas, the major metro areas of DC and Atlanta, and we also have that with Chicago nearby. So I just want to thank you again, Jason, and I wanted to bring it full circle for everybody that part of why this example was so important is we have one that we can look at, one of many. So thank you. Okay, so on to the conversation with everybody today. So thank you all for being here. We have a really amazing lineup of speakers, and we will have a short time for Q&A, and then after this we'll all go to lunch. So thank you everybody for your time and energy this morning. Okay, so the first question I wanted to start with is just around the conversation and who does passenger rail serve? We've talked about it a little bit, but I want to talk about this from a perspective in Ohio. And Stevie, can you speak to that first?
Yeah, of course. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
So I think everyone in this room is here for a reason. You have all heard that passenger rail benefits folks who can't drive or won't drive, don't have access to a vehicle or otherwise. Here in Central Ohio, that's 1 in 10 Franklin County households. That is households, not individuals. And that doesn't include people who have access to a car, but maybe it's not super reliable, or maybe it's shared among folks, or maybe it's even shared among families, right? And so we've all heard that. I want to kind of bring it home a little bit with some very specific examples. So my mother is a disabled veteran. She served in the U.S. Army, and she can't get around without some form of public transit. So she uses CODA to get around locally, and if she wants to leave, it would be really nice for her to have a train. We could drive in a car, we could potentially rent a car, but she can't sit for a very long time due to some of the injuries that she sustained overseas.
Oh.
And so being able to get up and walk around in something like a train is really going to benefit her and folks like her. I have some very dear friends who just had a baby, and their family lives in Lima, Ohio. And so if they want to travel back and forth to see their family, they can either drive, with all of the danger that comes with driving, with all of the distraction that comes with driving, including perhaps a baby in your back seat. If anyone has kids, you know what that's like. And it would be so much easier for them to be able to get home, right? Moving outside of Central Ohio a little bit, I'm going to call out someone who actually lives in Rep. Willis's neck of the woods, and you may be familiar with Steve Holtice, whose son lives here in Columbus, Ohio, and does not have a car, and would love to be able to go see his dad. So Steve is benefiting from this. For folks who have been paying attention to the news, we know that the Cleveland Browns are getting a new stadium. And for folks who follow the Cleveland Browns, you know that they could use a win. And one of those wins could be passenger rail for folks around the state who unfortunately root for that team. Sorry. Business owners, small and large, drivers who don't want to deal with extra traffic on the road, folks who want to age in place, whether they are in the city or outside of the city, around the state, need a place to get around and to maintain that agency and that freedom. The Ohio Department of Transportation, as we see, could also benefit from this. You know, we have all of this money going into maintaining and expanding roadways, and it's not enough. So what we need to do is get people off of those roads. We can do that by passenger rail. And the last thing I'll say is Ohio politicians would really benefit from this, because if you are part of the group of people that gets passenger rail in Ohio, you're going to be very popular. We saw the numbers. So for whatever that's worth, those are the folks who benefit from passenger rail.
I like passenger rail.
Need to Columbus back and forth a lot, and I'm sure you are all tired of driving.
Yeah.
I also, Stevie, to your point, wanted to mention that ODOT's 2-year budget is $11 billion, and if 10% of households don't have access to a car, and we were to allocate proportionately, that would mean Ohio, in theory, would have $1.1 billion or $550 million a year to allocate for those who don't have a car, which, as we can see, would do incredible, and it's a lot of money that could do a lot of things. Does anyone else want to add anything else in terms of who rail serves that we haven't discussed yet?
I would just add that, and I love the fact that you brought up Steve Holtice. There are so many people that are in those situations, and we know this. And I love the fact that we have this whole conversation about the 3 C's and D. I see it where she does, where there's this nice, beautiful S right in the middle. And I have this beautiful picture on the wall of my office that is an old black and white from the 40s of the center of Springfield. And in Springfield, I'm sure you all know where Springfield is, or at least heard of it at this point. The dominating feature in that picture is the rail, because there was so much activity going on there. And if you go back there, and I know many of the cities that sit along rail in Ohio, go through them now, there are still many of the structures that supported the level of rail that was serving things in those cities is still there. Still things that we could bring back. There are historic structures near there. And for us now, with the potential of doing this, it puts still our main rail right through the middle of downtown, in the area where our historic center is, in the area where our most served hotel is, in the area where our most served actual gathering location, where we have our large events, where we have our symphony orchestra. All of those things are literally within a half block of the main rail that runs through our town. So I absolutely agree. I would ride it all the time, because I waste so much time just in transit on I-17, right? There are so many ways and things that this makes sense, right? We just have to get to the right point.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up. One stat I also had was that we did used to have very robust rail in Ohio. In the early 20th century, Ohio had over 9,000 miles of rail. Cleveland alone saw over 150 trains each day. And not only were the 3 C's and D's connected, but virtually every town with over 1,000 people in Ohio was served by passenger rail. So we did used to have this network. Things have obviously changed, but this is what we're looking to bring back. So I want to move into having the conversation around the economy. We've seen how it's helped so much in North Carolina. I would also love to sell out your commissary, Jason, on a train and enjoy some food and drinks. But Jessica has specific experience working for Experience Columbus and understanding tourism in Ohio. So Jessica, can you speak a bit about how rail can impact the economy, both in terms of those who already live here, but also in terms of the tourism that we see?
Yes, can everybody hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Good morning. Is that better?
Yes.
So tourism is great for local economy because it is outside money that is coming in. So it's a huge injection of revenue that otherwise the community members, the residents are paying into themselves. Just some information about here locally in Central Ohio. So we see about 53.2 million visitors coming to Central Ohio every year. Those visitors spend $8.2 billion into our economy. So that money is going to hotels, it's going to restaurants, it's going to small businesses, and that $8.2 billion that is spent turns into local taxes that are generated. So $400 million in city and county tax revenue that is generated off the money that the visitors spend here. That saves me and every other Franklin County resident about $1,500 per year in tax burden that they would otherwise be paying. So it's a huge benefit for the local economy, for the residents, community members that live here. It's also great for infrastructure investment. It's going to spur that to keep up. Also cultural exchange and visitations to cultural heritage sites, keep the preservation of those. And then also community pride. I can't tell you how often we get people that come here and visit Columbus for the first time, and they're like, oh my gosh, we never knew. So it really develops a sense of pride for the community members when you have visitors that come in and visit your city and you want to show it off. So it's great for the economy, it's great for the community overall. There's just a ton of benefits.
Columbus is also the largest city in the U.S. that is not served by any passenger rail. So keeping with the economic development conversation, if you actually all look at your tables, we have some studies that All Over Ohio has conducted. One is specifically on the economic impact of 3C&D. And one of the things that the study determined was that the upfront construction of 3C&D would help contribute up to $107 million annually to the GDP, and then 25 to 47 annually after that. Austin, I know you have worked at the chamber and you have a lot of experience in those circles. Can you also speak to the economic impact of rail in Ohio and its impact it can have on the economy?
Yes, so we constantly, and I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea that everybody just wants to go from the rural areas to the city. I'm from Cincinnati. I understand people want to come see the Cincinnati Bengals win games and joke on that. Well played, like that. But the other side of this conversation really changes into the idea that Ohio is a state where we have a lot of smaller rural areas that have so much to offer. I'm gonna ask the question right here. How many of you have had a strawberry corn dog from the Strawberry Festival in Ohio? Raise your hands.
I never had it.
Exactly. Nobody. Right? Nobody. I've had it. It's really good. But I say it to say we constantly talk about the economic development that we'll see in the 3C plus D, right? But we also think about the future and what it does for our rural areas and what it does for opportunities, much like in North Carolina, to say, hey, we can make a train that goes to Dayton, or that maybe there's a line that's close to Troy, and you can go to the Strawberry Festival, right? It already brings in tons and tons of people every year. But imagine if we dedicated a whole line or a whole day to that one area, right? Troy, Ohio would change overnight.
Yeah.
We would see the downtown, we would see hotels pop up, we would see Airbnbs become a thing, we would see stores, bars selling out. They can't keep up with the track because as we've seen in other places, right? When you bring that economic activity to smaller areas, much like Louisville, if you've ever been to Louisville, those hotels are empty 90% of the year. But come Derby Day, every hotel is filled with people, and they live off of that revenue for the whole year. And so we have opportunities to create economic development in rural areas such as Troy. There are beautiful places like Mount Vernon that we can say, hey, we may not be able to give you this every single day, but if we can find those special pieces of each one of these rural areas, one of these smaller cities, smaller towns, and we can give them the opportunity to develop. I think of places like Normal, Illinois, right? They got an Amtrak station. They had $220 million in development since that station's been created. There are only 50,000 people in that city. So we're talking 220 million is more than it's bigger than a drop in the bucket. It has changed how they look. And if you don't know where normal Illinois is, it's where the first Steak and Shake is. So just for reference, it's as Midwest as Midwest gets. So coming from an economic perspective, we really have to look at it and say, you know, it does benefit the big cities, it does benefit the Ohio areas, but truth be told, a lot of these rural areas that we live in and that we have will see so much more. They'll see so many more people, so much more tourism on things that, you know, again, none of us have had the strawberry corn dog. Hopefully, once we get this rail, everybody will have had it and can enjoy the party. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. And Representative Willis, I would love your take too. You're from Springfield. What do you think, how do you see rail benefiting Springfield, Ohio? But also, what do you think is and we'll get into advocacy in a second, but what do you hear from your constituents in terms of either why they do or don't want rail, or what are they looking for that rail could help deliver for them?
I think it's all about growth. In all honesty, we have so many good things that are going on in different places in Ohio. Springfield is not just a microcosm of things that have happened good and bad over the last several years, but the ability to grow with all of the resources that we have, because we become constrained. We know that our ground transportation, my vice chair in the transportation committee here, Jack Daniels, right? He is a trucker, right? He's been in that business for a long time. He's got a truck caucus going, right? And they understand what the pieces and parts of that are. We have had a limited advocacy, I think, so far in our legislature to be able to say the same thing about why are we constraining rail where it is, and how can we do the things that need to build it out? Because for places like Springfield, we've had all of this growth in manufacturing and distribution and all of these other industry things that have come to us just over the last 5-year period, and we have not done the hard work of figuring out how we best serve that. And so that's the question that we've been asking the legislature this, go around. The last 2 years, we were not going to get anywhere. This time, what we've been able to do is get good messaging across that goes and looks at what are all the data sources that we have that says that a place like Springfield or the towns that are in that similar kind of situation could see incremental growth if we started making those smaller, and making bigger investments with small pieces of things that we find. Like, what are all of the other use and activity taxes and things that we're already gaining from the use of rail in those areas, and why are we not returning that back in to reinvest and build and go in that? We become constrained. We were talking about the transportation budget earlier and how that really, and when you mentioned it, that really is just from our gas tax. Like we knew going into that we were constrained by what are the things that we can do with the gas tax, what are the legal uses of that, how will we distribute it appropriately. When we started asking questions about what are all of those other taxes, we kind of got pushed back to say, those are things we're gonna have to deal with in the operating budget. And then he and I saw, we both kind of lost out on things like MIPRIC and the things that we wanted to have pushing forward, right? We're not gonna lose that again, and I can tell you, we're gonna fight hard to make sure that we're pushing this forward. And I think we made strides, we just haven't gotten there yet. Because, again, all of those towns, I think they don't know necessarily all of the things that this can bring, and we need to be telling them, hey, this is what an expansion in rail in your area can bring, so that they are actually feeding. Like, I hear a lot, transportation committee chair, I get a lot of that feedback coming to me. I don't think that the rest of our legislators are getting the same level of feedback, and that's what we really need. We need advocacy in every district that is saying, hey, this is why, this is the data that supports it, and I think your organization is the place where we get that data to help do that.
Yeah.
Thank you, and we appreciate all your support.
And that's a great piece too, because I think what we fail to do sometimes in the advocacy space is try to make rail meet where the people are in terms of what their issues are, right? So we can sit here today and we'll talk about, and I know a lot of you are invested in this space, but we know the pieces that connect to us, right? I can tell you right now, living in Cincinnati, I couldn't tell you what pieces connect to someone who lives in Mount Vernon, right? And so if I go to Mount Vernon, Ohio, and I tell them, it's better for your grandfather to travel, they may not care about that. And I think it falls on all of us as advocates for this space to say, we need to learn more about what are the needs of these areas that you say these small towns that we aren't in. We can't just go in and say economic development. They may be happy with the economic development they have. That new store that they got, or the Walmart that they got, they may be happy with just that. But we can't just say, oh, do you want more, right? We need to ask them, well, what do you want to see out of this? Maybe what they want is like, oh, we just need access to hospitals, right? Or access to healthcare. well, then that changes this whole conversation, because now when we go to talk about, what does that mean? It's access through things that, if I live in Cincinnati, I can drive to, right? Or the best hospital. You mentioned that there's an access sign to the VA, right? Maybe some of these towns have connections to military. Maybe they want to get to the military base, right? Maybe that family is. So figuring out how to advocate on that space is just as important as understanding, like, how we meet them where our needs are, but where their needs are as well.
And if I could actually just add, I do think there is a fantastic opportunities for DMOs, destination marketing organizations, CVBs, convention visitor bureaus across the state to be working together with each other to build itineraries that kind of encourage a day stop at a lesser known city before you go to your end stop. So there's all kinds of opportunities for collaboration that really encourage kind of travel throughout the state, not just bigger cities you kind of pick up.
So I want to keep talking about advocacy. So we're going to start with you, Revitalists, and those two questions. So the first is,
I knew that was coming.
I know that has you're your own constituent, so I'm also curious what your own personal journey has been with Rail. Have you always been pro-Rail? Did something switch in your mind? Like, what was your journey to getting up here on the stage with us? And then I do want to talk about a little bit about what happened in this last budget season. As you all know, we were advocating for rejoining MIPRIC, increasing ORDC's budget, the Ohio Rail Development Commission, as well as ensuring we continue to move through the corridor ID process. We didn't get MIPRIC, we didn't increase ORDC's funding, and their commission structure changed. But we are moving forward still on corridor ID. And we obviously, there's still a lot of advocacy left to do. So it's a two-part question. One, I'm just curious about your own journey, about how you got here with Rail, but I also would just love to hear your take on what happened so we can get into the conversation on what we can do moving forward.
So to start with, I'm a real kid. Like I grew up with my dad and my uncle. One was an engineer. My dad was an agent. He took me all over what was the Southern Rail lines and out of Louisville, Kentucky, my hometown. Thank you. And all over Indiana and Illinois. And I traveled with him along the rail a lot and got to see that. And he never just made it the fun part, right? I mean, I was clearly a kid who had the big train set in the basement, right? I loved all of those things. Still love the rail. That was the easy part, but he made me understand because he was the guy who was actually, typing it, amazing typist. So I'd watch him type out the orders for these things, and then he would explain to me what it was doing and the why with the GE plant that was in Louisville, and all of the other things that supported these large distilleries that were near the rail lines, and why that made sense. And I got to see as a kid just the expanse of these large rail yards, how much stuff was moving through there, and made a connection to me that has lasted. I mean, it stayed with me my whole adult life of how much that connects our world. I jokingly told someone about our 5,000-mile journey going to the West Coast to see our son just recently on the roads. Along the road, what do you find? On the Oregon Trail, all the way to the southern parts of Washington State, you're following rail. Rail follows right along those things. And if you watch what's happening on it, which is always, again, I've always been interested, so I pay attention to what is traveling on the rail, and it's always been not only fascinating to me, but it's given me a sense of why things actually work the way they do, why our country is able to do the things, the amazing things that we do, because we have things that are national assets, like our rail network, like all of those things that we do. So that's kind of how I get here. It made it easy for me to be advocating and be in the transportation side. The joke about that is I'm a pilot, right? So I went to the Air Force Rig, spent 30 years doing those things, flying jets. But again, those dovetail for me together because it's all part of the network of great things that make us great. The other part of that.
Yeah.
So the budget, I felt, and I know Jack had the same feeling that I did, that we were really winning the argument on the things that we felt like. And I think some of the conversations we've had here about timing, and Jim said the timing of what it is that we could be doing and get this launch point now. And I appreciate the fact that he highlighted the things that we lost on, really, the things that we really had opportunities for in this budget to move forward with. We felt like we were winning that in the House, and I think the messaging that we had was correct. The data that we got back from advocacy organizations and the things that we needed were all great. I see John Esterly sitting in the back there. Thank you very much, sir. Again, the sources of good, solid data to make people look and go, okay, yeah, I'm starting to understand that. What we found, though, is there is not a good widespread strategic thought across the entire legislature. And there's a problem with the fact that, you know, we turn over, like, I like term limits, but we start seeing the fact that as we, you know, lose and kind of change over it, we lose a lot of corporate knowledge in those things. And so when I look at the big picture and go, hey, strategically, how are we doing? And then try to separate out just the rail side of that. I felt like we had some good opportunities. Ripford was one of those. Timing-wise, it was one of the best advantages that we had that, hey, we're through that whole stage one or phase one of figuring out what this whole corridor potential layout could look like. And if we're going to be successful in moving forward, then we probably need to have a seat at the table in lots of different places. But Ripford was an obvious one, right? We needed to have something on the passenger side to tell us and give us the feedback that we needed, I think, to make decisions going forward. So in the House, I felt like we had it pretty well handled. As we've seen, it didn't necessarily go the same way inside the Senate. And part of that, again, is I think there's still some holdover there. I think timing is good. It feels right to me, and I think there's a really great advocacy to say timing is good for us to be moving forward in passenger rail, but that is not the common thought across the entire spectrum of people that are in the legislature right now. And that's just that's the hard fact. And so I think we have some advocacy to do. I do not want to go from this point, knowing kind of how we set the next 2-year operating budget, without saying we have to start now on what our wins are going to look like in the next operating budget, because this is when the planning for that starts. And so I think this is timely. Like, this gathering is timely. I just want to make sure everybody here understands that this is when we need to start that advocacy across all of the entire legislature and all of those in those districts that you all represent and are in, so that we can come back the next time and everyone is nodding and we're in agreement. We're never going to get everybody on board with this, right? But all we need is the majority be in agreement, and I think the data and the information things are there. We just have to advocate strongly enough to get that across the finish line.
Okay.
That's fair. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't have more questions for you, Stevie. So in order for advocacy to happen at that way, Mitch had mentioned the coalition. We have a broad coalition in Ohio. It is continuing to expand, and the momentum is there. All Aboard Ohio has been working really hard to make sure that coalition is known, it is present, and that we're working in unison. Transit Columbus has been a partner of All Aboard Ohio's, and I want to talk about the connection between wins at the local level and wins at the state level, because quite literally, inner city passenger rail works when you've got that last mile connection, when you go from Columbus to Cleveland, but you can get around Cleveland on the RTA. And so we've seen a lot of wins also happen at the local level, and these things relate. So both from an advocacy perspective and in terms of how these systems work together. So Stevie, can you speak a bit to the win that you had with BRT in Columbus, and also speak to connecting inner city with last mile and why it's important, and give us your thoughts on advocacy strategy for how we can all continue to make this forward and be good coalition partners to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So for folks who don't know, we recently passed a levy that would give money to an initiative called Link Us, which would give us bus rapid transit, which would give us better sidewalks and bikeways to connect folks to that bus rapid transit, and would increase existing bus service here in Columbus. And if you all think, it's really hard to get people on board with trains, try buses, because they are the least sexy thing. And in fact, when we advocate for more bus service, people are like, okay, but what about the trains, though? Yes. But let me just start by saying this. Getting Link Us on that ballot and getting it passed was a 10-year project. It should have been shorter than that, but it was a 10-year project, and it was a lot of failing first and then succeeding. And the way that ultimately we were able to succeed is to make that project relevant to every single person in the city, right?
Right.
Now, we all know that we all need to get around, so it's already relevant. But when the bus nerds are talking about more buses and the train nerds are talking about more trains, a lot of people are going to tune that out, surprisingly enough.
Yeah.
But when you start having the American Heart Association come and say, hey, we actually need more active transportation, And when you have low-wage workers unions saying, hey, we need our folks to be able to get to work. When you have big employers say, hey, we need our folks to be able to get to work. When you have the Chamber of Commerce, when you have the hospitals, when you have the teachers, when you have the neighborhood associations, when you have all of the people, when you have the tourism industry, when you have all of these people who aren't normally talking about buses and trains, suddenly start talking about buses and trains in those conversations, then people start to listen. And so how do you do that? How do you make it relevant to people? Well, if you ask, you'll find that it's already kind of relevant to them. Talk to any chamber of commerce anywhere, and transportation is one of the highest things, if not the highest thing on their list of what is important in the things that they are trying to do. Do they have the bandwidth always to tackle that? No. So from an advocacy standpoint, what we do at Transit Columbus and what All Aboard Ohio does is to train people to be advocates in the spaces where they already exist. I don't need to know what happens in Mount Vernon, Ohio. I need someone in Mount Vernon, Ohio to understand why it's important to them, which they already do. So we just need to find those people and uplift their voices and give them a couple of tools to be able to talk to their representatives, to be able to know that that is something that they can do, rather than, we have almost 1 million people in Columbus, Ohio.
Say senators. We need the senators.
We need the senators. We need folks at the State House advocating also for this. We need folks in every community advocating for this, and the way that we do that is first by listening, right? By saying, okay, this is why it's important to me, why it's important to you, and then saying, okay, great, you already know why it's important to you, now go tell that to your senator. That's how we get to where we need to go. It can't just be us. It can't be the people with all of the numbers. It has to be the people with the stories too, and you have to be able to connect them and their story to the folks who are making decisions.
In terms of advocacy from an organizational perspective, and particularly the tourism lens, how do you all approach that, and how can we all better support each other in relation to the State House as well?
I don't think I have too much to add outside of what Stevie just said. She said it beautifully. I think it's collaboration is key. Hearing all the different voices. I'll tell you, our board voted for the first time in a very long time on a kind of a public ballot issue that went forward, and it's just because transportation was so important to not only our community but the visitors that come in as well. So I think it's just collaboration, partnerships, and it's a need that's going to serve everybody. So we need to hear from everybody.
Yep. Okay. And Rep. Willis, another advocacy question. So sometimes in these spaces it feels really obvious, right? We need to educate, we need to tell our stories, we need to present the data, but sometimes it also feels like we do that ad nauseum and it still isn't moving the needle. And I think where a lot of us felt frustration in this last budget season is, to some degree, it felt like not only did we not get MIPRIC, but in some ways things were moved backwards by losing our passenger rail commissioner, a seat that had been vacant for a long time. So I'm curious your take on, are we missing something? Are there interests that we're not aware of? I know there's always lobbying happening and everyone's got their own interests, but what else could be done in terms of education, or what is happening that advocates should be aware of that would allow us to more meaningfully take steps forward? And I'll also say, in context to our own advocacy, it felt like there was really, at least to our knowledge, a couple individuals in the Senate that had the most heartburn, as John calls it, around what we were asking for. So when it's just a few people or a few interests, what do we do? Do we double down on those folks? Is it education? Is it fundraising? Is it something else? What is more the take? What's your take on that?
I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you're winning. Did I believe that? I know where we're at with this budget getting through, that doesn't feel like it, but I can tell you that from the conversations we had, at the beginning, I pretty much was convinced that we weren't going to get MIPRIC in the House version at all. So there was going to be no conversation about it. And within about a month's time or so, that conversation started to change. And it wasn't just because it was a negotiating point or anything else. It was honestly because people started to understand that it actually made sense. And that came from messaging from many of us inside the house, but the message and the data and the information that we needed came from advocacy and people that were actually coming to see us and saying, hey, if you need any backup, and I always say we need backup, right? The reasons why we want to see you on a regular basis is because you are bringing us the data and the information and the stories that actually connect to people that when we're going and having these conversations in a larger forum, we can say, hey, oh, by the way, let's talk about this again and maybe take a little different take on it. And I know it doesn't feel like it, but timing is right. Again, I think what Jim said is absolutely correct. I have a personal rub with North Carolina, again, because I'm an aviator, right? So I say we're the home of aviation. You don't want to hear any of this stuff, right? But the example of what North Carolina is doing is something that, again, if I have to goad people into it, if I have to make them, feel ashamed by the fact that North Carolina is outrunning us on this, I will do that. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't mind. That probably comes from my background in training, but I don't mind poking someone in the chest and saying, what you're saying doesn't make sense. And sometimes that happens, right? And we have to have the best information possible, the best data to back that up. Again, I love the fact that you continue to highlight the fact that the stories that go along with that, the human impact that this potentially has, that's the place where I think you're going to win. If you have to go back to the old mantra of winning hearts and minds, well, guess what? That's part of what you have to do with your legislature. And that starts with having those advocates in those districts who are able to make direct contact with senators and representatives and saying, hey, this is why. This is the ultimate impact that it can have on your district. This is the actual tax incentive that we could get out of this. Right? This is the kind of reinvestment plan that we would have, and it falls into maybe our larger, the chamber in that area going, hey, this actually falls into our strategic plan because it helps source other things that we can bring into our area. I think, again, you don't realize it, and it might not feel like it right now, but you really are winning, and the time is right to double down and push forward with, again, this is the planning phase for the next 2-year operating budget, and I'll even back that up to say it's even a planning point for what I believe is the transportation budget, which we want to expand and do a different way the next time, and that so our timing is even shorter. So again, that's why I keep telling people that anything that you are thinking about right now that you didn't win on or you didn't feel like you got where you wanted to in this particular budget, this is the time, right? Let's gird up, let's get our pieces and parts together and start moving forward with the planning phases for what's that next version look like.
Yeah.
So keep up the calls, meetings, and emails.
Double them up.
Double them up. Okay. We don't hear that.
Yes.
We appreciate that validation. Okay, last few questions. I know we're all ready for lunch soon. So, what does a thriving rail future look like for Ohio in 10 years? And I say 10 years because it sounds like a lot of time in transit planning, it's not necessarily, but where can we be in 10 years? And I want to also ground this in the fact that, we've alluded to the mistakes, plural, of the past. But I think the biggest one that so many of us feel is the $400 million that Ohio gave back to the federal government for high-speed rail between the 3 C's and D. We cannot make that mistake again, and we can't drop corridor ID again. We cannot do that. So what does the next 10 years look like in all of your minds for a rail vision for Ohio? And I'll add a second point to that. What can we do now? I know you've touched on that a bit, but what else? And Austin, we can start with you.
So what's interesting, and I'm gonna double down on what you said. So I work in the advocacy world. I've been doing it for the last 5-6 years. And the one thing I've learned about advocacy, policy, anything we want to move forward, that it is truly the long game. And I don't think I've ever seen a piece of legislation passed in less than a year. If it is, it sucks. Okay? and it gets stopped, and then we restart it, right? So the first piece is that this is the long game. Rail in Ohio has been the long game. It's been the long game since 2012 or 2008, the first time we had a chance and we didn't get it. 2008 the first time. So we're now almost 20 plus years from there, and not that we restarted, but we reignited the energy behind it. I start with that to say 10 years from now, we will have a new governor, right? So we may, in 10 years from now, and it'll be a different governor than the governor that we have next. So that means that we're going to have to advocate and talk to our next governor and make sure whoever's in the State House and the Senate after that, and make sure that their ideas pass on to their constituents and whoever comes after them. And then from that point, those 2 years, which is 2035, we have to be able to make sure that any progress that we've made in the state has stayed and it keeps momentum. What I think that looks like in 10 years is that, I would love not only for there to be, rails in the ground and people moving, but I want there to truly, genuinely be a shift in mindset when it comes to Ohio and transit. I think there's too often, especially in the cities, that you need a car. Actually, everywhere. Let's be honest. In Ohio, if you don't have a car, and let's be honest. Sometimes, whether it's a social status, whether it's a way to you just want to get around or a comfortability place. If you have a car, you're good in Ohio. And in 10 years, I would hope for rail that we've changed that mentality to say, no, take the bus. I used to love the Greyhound. Me and my great grandmother, she's 86. We used to take that Greyhound up to Detroit multiple months to go see mom. And so really change the mentality around what does it mean to take public transportation. That's what I would see as progress in 10 years, right? Not only having people going up and down an actual train in Ohio, but them saying that I'm doing it not because I came to the all aboard meeting, I'm doing it because I see the benefit and I've never been to an all aboard meeting, right? And I just know that, oh, this train is great, or this bus is great, or I can ride my bicycle, this is great, right? That would be success for me, or at least in 10 years for this work.
We'll lightning round it. So, if you see rail in 10 years, what can we do now? And I will mention, if we go all the way through corridor ID, we would have rail by the early 2030s. So that is less than 10 years. Go ahead, Phyllis, if there's anything you want to add.
So the big vision is that all of the things that we know are working in other states, that our state would go and would recognize those things. And in 10 years, we would already be through all of those planning, build out, and we would be flourishing there. And I come from the aviation side, so come to this conversation thinking that there are other ways to utilize what we have, again, the national assets that we have just inside our own state that can cover so much more for us in a very efficient way, that people can be connected with all of those other pieces of that. I love having great bike routes in here and having public transportation available, but the expansion of those to serve everyone who really needs and desires that at this point, we're just at the cusp of it. We're moving forward, and there are little incremental things, but we want to be at the point in 10 years where we have served all of those pieces that we can. And this is where I said earlier, we have not done a great job of having a strategic plan of what does it look like in 2035 for Ohio. How do all of those transportation means come together to serve as many, we'll never get maybe to the all point, but as many of those hot points and places where we know it's needed. So in my mind, again, coming from the aviation side, we've got electrified aircraft that we're flying in Ohio right now. Advanced air mobility connects to all of those things, and it provides, in some cases, for let's say our short line railroads, it also in places that we can't move goods easily on the ground, it relieves some of the pressure on the truck lines to be able to provide short haul things by another means, another efficient, quiet, source of movement of things. So we have a microcosm of transportation things that are changing now. And again, I think in 10 years, those look like a future that I only imagined with the Jetsons, right, in the 1960s, right? So Ohio is at the leading edge of some of these things, but we are behind on things that we need to be moving forward on. I only say that to remind you again that this is the time. Our planning starts now. I think we need a strategic plan for what does transportation overall, right, all of the individual pieces look like in Ohio in 2035 with the incremental steps to get there and the planning that's required to get to that phase. So that's what I'm going to be pushing to do. I'm going to be asking Jack to help me with that also as we get that done over the next couple of years.
Awesome. Thank you. And phase 2 will help us with that from the rail perspective. Jessica, where do you see rail in 10 years in Ohio, and what can we do to get there?
In 10 years, I would love it if we were working with other DMOs and CBDs, like I said earlier, across the state, planning multiple city itineraries that encourage kind of 1-day, 2-day stays in areas that maybe they wouldn't think of otherwise encouraging growth to come back. We know when you visit a city, that's kind of your first step in thinking about moving there. So visitation is kind of the first step in growing a population. So I would love to see that. We recently did a perception study that showed that only 44% of Ohioans feel very familiar with Columbus. That really surprised me, knowing that we're the capital. So there's tons of opportunity across our entire state for more awareness, more visitation, and I think there's a great opportunity if we were to get Rail to work with those other cities to really encourage that travel.
Stevie, how about you?
I think that part of what makes this fight difficult is that we don't have a lot of rail already, and people don't always have the greatest imaginations. They see what is around them, and they say, all right, how do I get more of what I have, not how do I get something different. So in 10 years, when we have more passenger rail here in Ohio, a future that I see is people saying, oh my gosh, not only do I love this, but I want more, right? So it's taken us this long, and it will take longer to get to where we want to be, just to get those initial steps, those baby steps, right? When we were talking about North Carolina earlier, right? It's like you have to start somewhere. You have to start with the slower routes. But as soon as people can see it and experience it and touch it, as soon as, instead of you saying like, hey, wouldn't you love to bring your kids on the train, actually watching people see their kids delight at riding a train, that makes a huge impact on people, and it makes them want more. So once we get those initial wins, once we get those lines in, once people can actually experience this for themselves, everyone in this room knows that people are going to want more of that. And suddenly the progress we're making goes from this to this. So we just gotta make it past that first step, and then it gets easier from there.
Yeah, we saw Jason's ridership slide, which was amazing. And remind me, what was the year-over-year growth the last 2 years?
So since 2019, 55%.
55% since 2019, and that included the